Okay, so thank you all for coming here again. My name is Kennedy. I'm a certified rehabilitation counselor in anticipation here come May 2023 when I graduate, but I took the CRC myself and I did pass it. Now, with that being mentioned, I have a couple of disclaimers before we go further. As I told last time, this group will not guarantee that you pass the examination, but it'll help you design for professionals like you and myself to help one another to grasp better knowledge of rehabilitation counseling and collaborate together to build our knowledge and expertise towards becoming a CRC certified. With that, all the materials and lectures and information are not funded or sponsored in part by myself or agencies themselves. You are required to pay for your own textbooks, flashcards, and study materials. We can share it together as a group, yes we can, but you're ultimately responsible for your own study materials. With that, we don't represent any particular major organizations, schools, companies. There's no funding, there's no sponsors, so there's no solicitation. So we're not being sponsored for this, we're all volunteers. And with that, everything contributed to the group is again solely voluntary and has a zero mandate. But again, the more you contribute, the more you involve yourself, the better we can help one another to pass our credentials. Okay. All right. And is anybody seeing me share screen? Yeah, okay, good. All right, so let's go straight into it. So like I mentioned last week, we were definitely, hello? Does somebody want to talk or had a question? No, okay, no problem. If you need to get off mic, you need to talk or say something, feel free to do so. I'm not gonna be like, oh, raise your hand. No, just do it, okay? I'm not going to stop you from chiming in because I'm going to be asking everybody in here questions. So I will be calling out names, just so you know, and I will be picking a few. This is going to be a long lecture, so if you cannot stay the whole night, don't worry too much. I will have this recorded, but because it's a lot of materials, and this is the big meat and potatoes of a lot of the CRC exam. So first section in the red book, if we recall, is talking about the evidence-based practices. Basically, it's a method or framework for integrating the best scientific research evidence into clinical decision-making process made by rehab counselors. Nothing that a rehabilitation counselor does is without some sort of supported scientific and sound theoretical evidence. With that, that's regards to using our services such as doing assessments, case conceptualizations, and interventions. With that, of course, we are ethically bound to the evidence-based practice theories between not only the ACA Code of Ethics, but also the CRC Code of Ethics. We follow two, okay? With that, if you don't know what the CRC Code of Ethics is, please Google it, please learn it, because that's what guides us to make the right decisions and to also help clients make the right decisions in their career goals. So, with that being mentioned, anything that's evidence-based is basically saying it's supported by science, it has high validity, it has high reliability. With that, it's also psychosocial and has vocational interventions. It's a two-part facet program. And with that, it also includes things like psychiatric rehabilitations and interventions for clinical issues. So that's why as a rehabilitation counselor, we have the privilege of looking at clients' medical, behavioral, and overall their life records to see what's going on. Unlike maybe somebody that's in the regular workforce development that doesn't need to see those kind of credentials, we have the capabilities to do that because we're also assessing on their competencies to obtain employment. So with that too, the framework is as such. It's formulating a problem, finding the best evidence to the question, appraising the evidence, implementing findings, and then ongoing value research. So if you're talking about the whole risk management or research process, that's pretty much what it's talking about. It's just fancying it up. With that, I don't recall seeing anything too much in here, this particular section in the CRC exam, but it's not to say that wouldn't come up. So I would encourage you to definitely keep those in mind and learn that. With that too, let me ask the audience here, whether you're a mental health counselor or whether you are a rehabilitation counselor or doing something that's helping somebody with a disability, what kind of techniques or interventions do you use to help your clients and where you work at? Anybody?
So what I've used, hi, Kennedy, and hi, everybody. Thank you for the invite. What I've been using a lot is the motivational interviewing, you know, since we went really intense in one of the courses, one of our classes. I've been using that a lot. The book has been a great help as well. So I sometimes rely back on that book when I need assistance or so forth, but that's a technique that I've been using, and I've really been just incorporating other techniques to that. But I believe that's what my main focus is at the beginning.
Okay, so you and with that, there's backed evidence to support that motivational interviewing works. So I appreciate you sharing, Monica. Thank you. With that, I'm going to talk and reach out to, and pardon me if I'm mispronouncing your name, Coney. Do you use any other sort of evidence-based practices or any sort of specific counseling theory in your role? Jabo Coney? Okay, I guess that person can't hear me right now. It's okay. I see Brianna's been using MI. Okay, I use MI. How about this? Emily Keeney, do you use any others, apart from motivation interview, do you use any other sort of evidence-based practice theories in your work? One, or at least one that you have a preference for?
I think it depends on, I'm a VRC, I work for the state of Ohio. I guess it just depends on the client and what their disability is and what they're coming in as, but I do like motivational interviewing. I do like that. I think it helps, you know, the individual open up. I think it helps build a good rapport as well.
Okay, and what about things like, do you use anything like cognitive behavior therapy, person-centered therapy? I
would say more person-centered. As far as cognitive behavior, we are, I mean, I'm not like a mental health counselor, but definitely person-centered. Everything pretty much is person-centered.
I appreciate you, Emily. Thanks for contributing. So, and you notice, I mean, that's just one facet of some of the things we use. Depending on your background, you may have specific areas that you're proficient in, and there's other areas that you'll learn from either your counterparts, maybe an OPC or whoever that use things. So like, for example, some people use a lot of CBT or cognitive behavior therapies, dialectical behavior therapies. Some people do things like behavioralism. If we talk about what we're going to talk about here in the slides, we're talking about like classical versus operant conditionings. You know, when you're dealing with somebody who has a specific set of habits, are you using some sort of a behavioral intervention to say, you know, let's not have this person keep doing that same behavior and instead replace it with something else, like an extinction, so to speak. So you're going to use those. But see, we just don't just outright use them. We have to make sure that those theories that we're using are backed by scientific evidence or backed by a lot of heavy foundational research. Like for instance, and this is for my older audience in here, who remembers the Rose Arch ink blots? You know, some people still say that those are still good today to use, when in reality, a lot of the scientific community has thrown that theory out. There's not that much scientific backing for that. There's a big dispute as far as using the lie detectors, like especially in like Border Patrol and things like that, so even just somebody who's nervous and has anxiety might show up saying, oh, suspected liar, using the lie detector test. It's not as accurate. But so, you know, there are some things that are sound and put in some that work really well and some stuff that aren't. So as you are looking in the CRC exam book, what they're going to want to know is, do you know what those evidence-based practices are? And are they backed by science? Are they backed by research? And that's the thing you're going to need to know. And with that, of course, you will see questions in the CRC exam is, when will you use those interventions? When and how? They will ask questions like that. So those are just things to kind of think about. Maybe it's been a while since you looked at a book. Just take some time to refresh your mind on some of those. Again, Google is my best friend, and I hope it's your best friend. So thank you all for sharing. I appreciate that. So with that, my understanding, though, is in the psychosocial rehabilitation aspect, they use things like supported employment, illness self-management, self-help support groups, and workplace socialization skills. But see, you just don't do those unless you have a backing and some sort of counseling theory to implement those interventions. With that too, that's also evidence-based, is doing the traditional transitional employment services like work adjustment skills, supported employment, which is providing support and finding jobs as quickly as possible. And of course, the end goal is to help your clients achieve some sort of competitive job position or competitive employment. So. Moving forward here with that, there's different models. And so in the CRCC exam, they might ask you about certain models of the supported or types of supported employment. That's the big thing in vocational rehab. And there's the individualized placement support model. There's also the competitive, or that which has been studied to be best. And that focuses on there. And then other ones, they include, of course, supported self-employment, clubhouses, vocational model, transitional employment, supported education, on the job or OJT support, customized employment benefits counseling, and get, choose, keep models. Don't ask me about what that is. Please read the book. I've never heard of that. One thing I can say though is that these models, whether you're doing it as an actual VRC or you're doing workman's compensation, you're probably going to use one of these models to help get your clients back to work as soon as possible. So make sure as you're learning, you understand the difference between these two, because they could ask you, you know, what is a clubhouse? What is the transitional employment? If this example is going through here through workers' compensation, would you give them the OJT support or give them a customized? They can possibly pull that out. So I'm just going to go straight to the book here on this part. Oh, that's not it. Sorry, my computer is just a little bit slow. All right, so in here. Okay, so in our evidence-based practices, what they're saying this is out of the book itself. There's different ways to practice. So keep in mind, we have the psychosocial vocational interventions. We have the psychiatric one, rehabilitation practices. These are people who use like work therapy. You see this a lot in the VA. And then you also have, of course, well, that's the research behind it. So where are we at? I lost this. You just told me where this section was at. Monitor vocational progress. Let me go find. There we go. So we're still in this section here. So when we talk about these practices, we're looking at, you know, how they monitor practices, their outcomes. If you call fidelity, if you remember last lecture in the book, they talk about what fidelity is. And again, making sure that when we're doing this, we're applying ADA and the interface and collaborative employers develop meaningful job supports to our consumers. So think about it this way. Whether you're doing job placement, whether you do an intake assessment, or you're the actual case manager, or if you're doing a little bit of both, you have these aspects that you're implementing while you're working the role as a rehabilitation counselor or in your job setting, because you have to see what the person's disabilities are. You have to see how you can make this person a profitable employee to an employer, because you are trying to sell a product to them in a matter of speaking, and the product is your client. Or if they're trying to be independent, you're trying to make sure that they can brand themselves as being self-sufficient. With that too, it may be also going to the actual work site, talking with bosses, talking with agencies at the work site, like a job skills trainer. And then of course, you know, making sure that they have a long-term commitment with the employer. Those are some of the big things. With that also being mentioned too, in rehabilitation counseling, they also have the balance of the illness self-management. And basically what that is that it's an individual strategy that minimizes the impact of chronic health or other disabling conditions on the daily lives of persons living with a disability. So, does anybody in here work with people who are elderly and older that have a disability? And if so, can you share a little bit of your experience? Oh, I guess that's me. I've done home health aid, so I've had the opportunity to work with seniors, and a lot of times what it is seeing what they can do and what they need a little bit of additional help on, and really teaching them how to use self-help support systems to get them to what they need to do. If they need a little assistive device to help them get out of bed, maybe that thing that lifts them up, well, then that's what you can recommend for them. If their insurance pays for it, great. If they need a little extra armrest to get up and down when they sit up from the bed and moving up, then that's one thing we need to get them. We want to know what their functional ability is and what they can do and cannot do for themselves. So like when you're doing your intake assessments, if the clients come in person, do they have good hygiene? Are they coming in limping? Are they on a wheelchair? How do their hands and fingers look? Are they taking care of themselves? You know, do they look like they just came out of the halfway house and they're maybe not ready to even start an employment? They have other barriers in front of them. So with that, you know, as a rehabilitation counselor, when you're doing that, you're also looking to see if they can learn or if they're able to use some sort of illness self-management to take care of themselves. That also means self-management in general, which is collaborating with family and community support. I'm sure many of you here might have had the opportunity to work with somebody who's a dual diagnosis, substance use and psychiatric. A lot of times they may end up homeless on the street because they're having family problems. And you end up working with the family member of that person, either getting back to a stable location or to help them find a job. That also includes those with chronic, whether they're acquired or they're inherited disabilities. You know, families get stressed. And so with that, you know, we also address that as well. Any questions about that or thoughts or perceptions? Or anybody want to chime in? Okay, let's keep going. So again, like I mentioned, it's used a lot for people with chronic health conditions until we're talking about long-term with that. But at the same time, when you're doing your assessment, you're taking care of your clients, you're also looking to see how they take care of themselves. Because if they can't take care of themselves, there's going to be no way for them to be able to get a job. So I'm sure most of you may understand it in your role that you're doing, but for CRC purposes, make sure that if they're asking you questions about what is illness self-management and what is it used for, remind yourself it's used to treat chronic health conditions and it manages these specific things. So if they're asking you about, you know, if you're doing X, Y, Z with this person, what kind of management is this? Is it self-help or is it an illness management? Is it a self-management or illness self-management? Stuff like that. There's also the management recovery program. These would talk about different impairments. That includes psychoeducation, medical management, relapse prevention skills, coping skills. Again, this is going again with dual diagnosis and show them be effective at improving. So there's different types. Illness management addresses several different areas of a person's disability. The other one, of course, which if you read in the book later, they go into more details of these. They just call them something different. There's also the self-help ones, where these are persons with chronic conditions, but they're trying to take care of themselves and they don't want too much interventions. They don't want to hand down, they want to hand up. With that, a lot of times that's your support groups. I don't know if anybody's ever run a job club or maybe been into a peer support group. That's what that's talking about. They're run by the professionals, peers, health professionals that help identify barriers and get them to there. So psychoeducation classes can be considered like a group. We're like a study group. So that's what they're talking about. And then you also have the other one that evidence-based practice tracks on, which is workplace socialization skills. So This is where we as rehabilitation counselors work really good with clients, especially if they're on-site area, because if they have low work performance, cooperations, low help from others, and everything else, these are things that are going to affect a person from not even wanting to work. And those are stuff that we are, as rehabilitation counselors, specialize in. So with this though, this particular practice, this is noted, this started in human resources. So human resources should know more about this too, but we as rehabilitation counselors know about this as well. So moving on, when we talk about the psychiatric rehabilitation or like work therapy, there's different types. There's the assertive community treatment, family psychoed, early interventions for first episode psychosis, and dual diagnosis. Tell me, can anybody here tell me what assertive community treatment is? And this time I'm going to pick you, John Evans.
Assertive community treatment. Well, based on my experience, it's a team of professionals coming together. So I'm thinking of the VA. So as you know, I'm contracted with the VA, but I'm a case manager. And I know that the VA has assertive community treatment there because they have psychiatrists, they have employment specialists, they have just a variety of professionals coming together to work with that individual. I believe that's what the assertive community treatment is.
Yeah, and I appreciate that because that really does go into the side because it is a multidisciplinary approach based on the community. So like the Department of VA has a veterans center. A lot of times in Texas, we have the Texas Veterans Commission that provides not necessarily health treatment, but support services for veterans, entrepreneurship and business. But we also have little VA health clinics that have that psychiatric, that have that rehabilitation calendar already, that have that those therapists that are ready to assist them. And so it's pretty much your in-person, sort of like your in-person services, but in an outpatient setting in some places. Other times it's usually going to be in a psychiatric hospital or ward. You know, in the military, they do have psychiatric hospitals, and they'll be doing intensive case management, rehab, and then support services when they get out. Does the person have a plan of what they're going to do when they leave? With that too, it's designed to reduce rehospitalization because if you recall the history of the deinstitutionalization, most people don't, unless they have something that's really, really bad that's going to be long-term, they're going to be not, you don't want them staying in there longer than what they need to. It's not always good for the person. Okay. With that, the most people most risk getting involved in that are usually in criminal justice involved, or they have a severe psychiatric breakdown. But again, thank you so much, John, for chiming in on that. Appreciate it. Now, with that too, there's also the family psychoeducation. So I'm not too sure about your family circumstances and maybe what led you to do even vocational rehab in general, but for those family members who have a child that's born with a disability, say Down syndrome, say autism and stuff like that, that's a huge change in a life from before they had the kid up to now. And not everybody's prepared to do that. And I'm sure that most of us professionals are aware of that, you know? And so in the CRC exam, they can ask you about what would be a good evidence-based practice in psychiatric rehab, and that's talking about family advocacy groups, integrated treatment plan facilities, involvement, and then with that, over standards, family psychoeducation over effective and decreasing relapse and rehospitalization. Of course, all these things are to prevent relapse and hospitalizations. So when we talk about somebody that has a very intensive situation, there's a lot of involvement of different aspects to the person's recovery. With that too, early interventions for first episode psychosis. If you recall about the IDEA Act of 1990, they implemented early, looking at identifying early potential psychiatric or disabilities within youth as they're going to school. In addition, of course, wanting them to go to school, they want to make sure that they can catch them, because if a child over time is developing some sort of psychosis, which it takes a psychiatrist to diagnose a very young child, but when they're teen years and they're getting older, if you catch it early, you can get them treatment ahead of time. That's very important, of course, when we're talking about, like, let's say, teens that are undiagnosed schizophrenic. A lot of times they end up dying from suicide. because they didn't know what they were experiencing was a psychotic breakdown. There are several videos and TED Talks and as well as studies on that too. That's why earlier mentions is good to know, because when somebody has that psychotic episode and has a breakdown, they don't know what's really going on because they're not here with reality. So with that too, of course, we talk about CBT medication. When we talk about low dose medication treatment, this is more psychiatric, but basically on the rehab side, we will want to make sure they're staying in compliance. You want to ask, ask the counselor, say your client's being seen by a licensed LPC. Hey, has this client been in compliance with their medication? Pardon me, in compliance with certain treatment? No, the person has not been shown up for treatment. I think he's going back into a state of psychosis. Okay, we need to see what's going on and maybe get him some interventions before he drops out of the VR program. Those kind of things. That's also talking about crisis, and of course, case management is a holistic approach. Dual diagnosis, again, that's talking about not only somebody with psychiatric, but a substance use disorder co-occurring. That requires, that's a lot of IDD treatment. So if you have a background as a mental health counselor and mental health intervention, I'm sure you know about these things. And what that does is, of course, reduce the chances of relapsing for a substance use. Here in El Paso, we have a lot of outpatient clinics that do those kind of services. They do the methadone treatment and everything. With that too, these are basically, this whole section, what it's talking about is different types of treatments that are evidence-based. And us as rehabilitation counselors, when we go further down into the theories, which we will talk more about them, we'll sit down and actually discuss these a little more in detail. So I don't want to get too much into it. Just know that we don't do these things without having supported evidence. And these things listed here, these type of practices are considered evidence-based. They're approved. They're not experimental. If they're experimental, they're going to stay within a research lab, and they're still being scrutinized by many different boards. Maybe some of you are trained in EMDR. So that is one technique that's used. That helps refractory memory processing for correct storage. I see a lot of people use EMDR for those who have PTSD or traumatic brain injury, or if they've had a traumatic sexual assault or something, just to kind of help them desensitize. So if you don't know what it is, definitely Google it. Make sure you know what EMDR is, because you could get asked a question about what this is about, or what does EMDR stand for and what is it treating for. Stress inoculation therapy. This is for people to be desensitized from early triggers. Maybe they have a high fear of anxiety, fear of heights, bugs, being alone, or something like that. That's what you use that for. And again, in the book, if you read it, it's going to show you what those are. So where are we at? Oh, there's MI, so it's all in here. Trauma-focused therapy. This is, again, we just mentioned that earlier. It's just using CBT principles, but in a more active way towards somebody's reaction to a traumatic event. It's used in children and adolescents, and of course, aimed at parents of children who experience traumatic, because anybody's ever heard of, I think it's, and correct me if I'm wrong, secondary trauma, or you can get secondary trauma from the child's initial trauma. So it is being used right now also to help people, for families as well, and caregivers.
Hey, Kennedy?
Yeah.
Hey, can you go back to that, the one slide? Yeah, this one, is this one relatively new, or because I don't recall this in courses when I was in school, this one.
Okay, stress inoculation therapy. Let me take a look at it here in the book for you. It might be called something different. So
it should be on page 44.
I can look it up. Yeah, I can look it up. Yeah, but I was just curious. Yeah,
it is relatively new. It's just like EMDR is relatively new. Stress and sit training is relatively new. So these are the more current therapies that are coming out for some of these treatment. Like, yeah, if you go back maybe 6 years ago, nobody really heard of EMDR, and some people laughed it off as a joke.
Okay.
Yeah, but SIP training or stress inoculation training is a relatively new one. So I would encourage you definitely take a look at it. Before
Mhm.
it was all about CBT. If you remember, like, just go back 8 years ago, it was CBT,
Mhm.
PTT, all the
Right.
BTs, you know. Now they're using different things. And basically what my understanding, like especially for PTSD, is how do we desensitize the person from the traumatic event so like that they can receive the CBT part of the treatment,
Mm.
the cognitive part of the therapy. That is my understanding of how these particular programs work.
Okay.
That one.
So,
Thank you.
no problem. No problem. And I'm gonna go ahead and mute. So, but I encourage you, they have it in the book, and I believe they go in a lot more detail within the book. So, and then of course, if you really want to know more about it, there's plenty of research papers out there, documents about it. YouTube also shows you how those work. But for you as a CRC counselor, will need to know at least what they are and what they're supposed to treat. So if you see that come up in a question, you'll be like, oh yeah, I remember the SIP training. That's stress inoculation. Oh yeah, that treats for PTSD. Oh, okay, it's PTSD. You know?
Mhm.
That kind of stuff. With that, of course, we have the trauma focus, which is, these are short-term behavior interventions, just like the other ones said, EMDR is. It's used for children and adolescents for emotional regulations, process traumatic experiences, and we went through that already. Let's keep going. For SUDS counseling interventions, this is talking about outpatient, inpatient, residential treatment facilities. So not too sure what exactly you do at your work area, but maybe you have some clients that are going between residential treatment facilities and your state agency to receive VR services to find employment. And you usually know that based off the clinical history records. Now, this one, users are more open to significant reduction in use versus absence of use. Yes, that goes back to the methadone treatment. So for some people, if you're familiar with types of addictions like substance use, especially alcohol, you cannot be 100% abstinence of alcohol if you've been using it for a very long time. That can end up killing a person. So rather than completely having them go abstinent, you reduce it to where they can function, but not enough to where they're going to be intoxicated. So these reduce some of those tolerance levels. And that's what they use a lot of methadone, they use a lot of alternatives. There are other drugs though that of course they can go off of it and it's a terrible relapse, it's a terrible withdrawal process, but they're not going to really die from it. So, but that's what this is talking about here. So when we talk about substance use, it's usually reducing the amount of the strong drug or whatever it is versus a full abstinence. And most of the time they're going to be at one of these facilities. So a lot of people talking about motivational interviewing. My favorite is motivational interviewing. Believe it or not, it comes from the background of positive psychology. So if you don't know what it is, I would definitely encourage you to read up what positive psychology is, because MI uses a lot of principles from that. And it's used in many different environments. My first training for it was done through a probationary. We were teaching it to people who do the probationary courts and also the probationary services for people coming out of jail to make sure they're in compliance. And we taught them how to use MI. And all it is just restructuring how you talk to somebody to get them to open up. So rather than being closed-ended yes or no questions, they're open-ended questions is the key idea. With that too, this works really good for people who maybe are just resistant to not want to change or even get therapy and give them a reason to think why they want to believe that. Unlike CBT, where they're being confronting or they're confronting their thoughts or confronting their ideas, this is non-confrontational. So I use it as a quick way to build a rapport with somebody, get enough information what's going on, and then provide them another intervention or help them out with something else. Doesn't know anything on motivational enhancement. Basically, it's a two-step process, but it helps them to get through their ambivalence about engaging in treatment, their stop substance use, or to get them to want to go to work and get a job. So, and I can tell you right now, my school taught me, we had a whole semester of MI in addition to my previous undergraduate experience doing MI as a coder. So if you don't know what a motivational interviewing is, ask your company to get you trained in it. It's really good. It's just a different way to talk to people, and you'd be surprised how you can use it to get people to really open up about themselves or open up about situations. Really, though, one of the things about evidence-based practices, according to the CRC, is there are limitations and what is constitutes as best evidence. Again, if what we're using has a high validity, high reliability, it can be retested, it's shown to proven to work, and then it's something that's going to be kept. If it's very subjective and it's very questionable, there's a lot of variables to it, then it's not really that good of a evidence. So with that, I'm not going to touch too much on this here. I'm sure most of you, whether you're doing clinical or you're doing casework, there's always a decision-making process going on. You have your intake, you have your assessment, you have your conceptualizations, your interventions, or how are you going to help the person develop a plan. It's a universal principle applied to many different settings. You use it in project management, you use it in supervising, you use it in IT work, you use it just about everywhere. It's just, in our case, it's put into a clinical-based setting, but it's the same decision-making model that you see universal. So if you see anything about CRC, oh, that's okay if you can't talk, that's no problem. But if you can always show that, you can always type the answer in here too, it's no problem. Or type something if you want, it's okay. With that, and I hope your baby feels better soon. With that, my recommendation is, as long as you remember what happens on these stages and what's supposed to happen, it'll be pretty easy for you to answer this question. So, anybody have thoughts or want to chime in about this? Nope, okay. This one here, I'm not familiar with this, but this is called the dual processing theory of information. So I'm going to go a little bit to the book here because I didn't quite see this. I didn't see this on the CRC, but it's not to say they couldn't use that. Okay. Dual process. What is this called again? System 1 processing. Okay. So basically what they did is how we break down information and how we as counselors learn it. So I think I'm not going to go too deep into this here. Basically, you're either going to process information quickly or you're going to take time and be careful about it. It's just how you think. You're left brain and right brain thinker. I'm not too sure if they might even ask this in the CRC, but it's not to say it's not there. So I just would encourage you, read it about the system 1 versus system 2 processing. Okay. With that, I can say that if you've been working in your job for several years or for a while, especially those who have tenure experience, you're probably a system 2 processing thinker. You have the skills and knowledge to carry on until they reach a certain mastery. You're probably doing it for a while. For novices like myself, students coming out, maybe they don't have full experiences, we're going to be doing a system 1 processing theory. That's the easiest way I would say you can understand that. So system 2, thinking bigger outside the picture, and then the system 1, which is a simple response to thinking. So the big thing that we have, and with this, and you can see this on the CRC exam, are about treatment plans and the how you develop plans and what are your goals, so to speak. Again, we're talking about I think the VA still calls it IWRP, but we call it the IEP or the IPE. With that, what are we going to do to help get the client to achieve their goals? What are they going to receive? Who provides services, auxiliary services, format, and so forth. You see a lot more of this in an inpatient setting. In an outpatient setting, you're looking at, okay, where's the person location? How are they going to get to and from the workplace? Is there going to be a job skills training with them? Do they need a job skills trainer? Do they need a work accommodation? And are they going to be able to sustain employment? So basically, though, this usually comes from supervisory levels, though, but as well too, when you're developing a goal with somebody or developing a plan with any of your clients, you want to make sure it's a SMART plan or a SMART goal. So on CRC, make sure you remember what these are. Okay. This is an old slide. I'm going to get rid of this. All right. Do we want to take a 5-minute break before we go into the next half?
Fine with me.
All right, we're going to take a 5-minute break. We'll get right back, and then we're going to go into the actual theories. And if anyone wants to get off mic and talk with me about anything, feel free to go off and talk.
Hey, Kennedy, I do have a question. Is there a
Go for
big
it.
difference between the book that we used before than this current book? I noticed that there was a difference in color. I think the old one was like a purple, navy blue. Is there a big difference in as far as information in it?
Yes, yes.
Yes, okay.
So I saw a couple of people were using the blue book to study, and the way it's framed and structured is very different to what they talk about in here now. So like there's some terms that are labeled differently that were part of the process. I forget which ones they are, but like for instance, I'm not too sure if the blue book still considers people as LGBTQ having a disability, but now in the DSM-5 it no longer is. In here you see more about multicultural counseling approaches, so forth, and a little more updated treatment processes like SIT therapy and so forth versus the blue book. So
I have the first, the second, and the third book. So I guess the first and the second are completely outdated.
So are you talking about the one that he posted on the slides? That what is it? The pink one? Is that the most current one out?
If you're looking at my share screen, it's actually right here.
Yeah, that one. So that's the most current?
Yes, that's the most
Okay.
current. And I wouldn't doubt that probably in the next couple of years, they're going to post out a new book soon. So I'm thinking for right now, this is still good until this was published in October 2021. So probably in a few more years, they'll probably get an updated one. So I would say get the most current one.
And Kennedy, is this the one that you used in order for you to pass the exam?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
I use it to pass the exam. I use a lot of other resources. I use the CRC prep cards. There's a slide in here because I shared it with everybody that has the resources that you can use. And some of these things are free where you don't have to pay for anything. Like the Quizlet, thank you, Emily Sussman. You can use those to do the Quizlet. A lot of information is in there too. You can purchase a pre-exam to see how well you do.
Okay.
And then, but I use the textbook. The textbook for me was like the biggest help.
Okay.
My professors referred it to me. My colleague referred it to me. So I would say, if anything, get this. And if you like online stuff, I like it. I like using this online.
I also spoke to Janice, and Janice had advised me that she was also using the other one, like the one that the Social Security one, the one that shows like the pass and all the benefits that the Social Security provides. Is that another material that you also used?
Yeah, so like I have a lecture that we talked about that. Like I have a whole lecture slide that goes into Social Security. One of the other team members that contributed, but you can also, I had to Google a lot of stuff too, Social Security Administration. And I would just go to Social Security Administration and they will tell you about those programs, pass, ticket to work and so forth. And they'll let you know about like the evaluations, everything. So you can, this is not the one, but it's Yahoo. Yahoo's terrible. But I would just go to the SSA Gov website. Everything's pretty much out there. If you look for it, they'll have it.
Okay.
You know, ticket to work program. And the FAQs is going to tell you what it's about.
Okay.
So when the CRC is a very comprehensive exam, it touches everything.
I know.
The book, I like the book because it does talk about past. It does talk about those things. It has it all in there. So you don't have to do too much digging. You just have a good reference book to study with.
Yeah, because I've been using, I think also like a study.com, and they've been showing like videos, and that has been very helpful. But I don't know if you've come across this, but I've noticed that on some material, it like contradicts itself. And I'm just like, oh, there's a few questions, you know what I mean? Very, very few that I'm just like, So, but I've been using that study one. Are you aware of that one? The study.com?
I've heard of it, and I heard you have to pay a fee sometimes to use
Yeah.
some of the videos. So it's good, but I'm gonna trust these people because they're CRCs, and then some of them do sit on the board, and they have more relevancy with talking about. Keep in mind, CRC overlaps a lot with like the NCE.
Right.
So except the difference is
And
NCE does mental health.
Yes, because I've been actually focusing on both. So that's basically my goal, is to accomplish both exams. But I do notice that both of them have similar information, but they're kind of different.
Yeah, and keep in mind, when it comes to rehabilitation counseling, it's focused towards people with disabilities because not all therapies is going to work on one person. You have to do a very multidisciplinary approach. When it comes to an LPC, you're just focusing specifically on the behavior or the thoughts or the mind of the person. See, we have the disability aspect of it where if they've been dealing with a chronic illness for years on end, they're going to have a very different mental health evaluation than somebody who had a sexual trauma or something, you know? But they still have their arms and legs and they might still be able to work. They just got to be as intensive care. So if you're studying for the CRC, use the CRC material. If you're going to study for the LPC, use the LPC material and study to what's in this here and what that study guide that I sent you for it for CRC, and don't overlap things too much because then you'll end up confusing things.
Yes, I have. Yes, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else have any questions or thoughts you want to chime or add in? All right, we'll get started here in a couple minutes. I will say this, the best method, which I'm going to go on Sunday morning, we will have our study skills sessions. I'm going to show you a couple of tools that I use, and if anybody wants to chime in, I help them get right answers to put it to them. The biggest thing on these things is like right here for GRE, SATs, any sort of entry exam or even certification exam is reading the question and studying to the question, not studying to the answer. If you study to the answer, you're going to get them wrong. I guarantee you get them wrong. But if you study to the question, what they're asking for, and you do a process of elimination, you have a 50% chance of getting it right. And if you usually go with your first answer, you're probably right.
And you're going to discuss furthermore on Sunday on that?
Yeah, and I don't record those. That's just, we go through actual questions. I may come up with a couple of questions. We may use the flashcards and show you kind of how to use that. Okay.
Awesome.
Yeah, because really a lot of it is just study taking skills. Like I'm sure most of you here that have PhDs, master's degrees, or at least a bachelor. So, you know, this a lot of this stuff should be just refreshing. It shouldn't be too totally new unless you're completely changing careers. But the ideal is build yourself a good study approach and a good testing approach, so when you take it, you'll pass. So, okay. All right, let's go ahead and return. I think everybody's back here, so let me get back to where we left off at. Thank you so much for chiming in your thoughts. I appreciate it. I really went, yeah. Okay, let's go here. Okay, so for some of this might be a refresher for many of you, so I'm just going to briefly talk about them. It's up to you to study what they are. I know Emily posted out in Quizlet. Quizlet has some great study cards for the or to study flashcards for the types of counseling theories. Another key thing you need to know too is not just the counseling theory itself, but who created it. They're going to ask you who coined. They might ask you who coined the term, and they may ask you, okay, if we're talking about the miracle question, this term was coined for solution-focused brief therapy by who? You know, or was it based on what? They can ask that. So again, read the question thoroughly to know what you're answering. So with that, when we call it solution-focused therapy, those are the miracle questions. Those are helping the client to change their worldviews and behaviors for more satisfying life. It's time limited because it's just to find a quick positive solution for resolving issues. It's not a long-term approach, but it's also an incremental change. In the textbook, solutions, focus, solution and focus. Can I type? I don't think I can. Where are you? Where are you? Really? It's in here. I don't know why it's not popping up. So, oh, probably because I'm in the wrong section. It'll help if I'm in the right section. No, we're in the right section. Where is it? I'm just trying to find you who started that. Here we go. They can ask you the theory that was created by this Azure and Bragg 1997, solutions-focused therapy of solutions-focused brief therapy included all of the following except, and then you would have to know what these approaches are, these questions are to answer it. They can do that. They can say this solutions-focused brief therapy coined by so-and-so was including exceptional questions, miracle questions that was designed to what, those kind of things. So when you study this, the best, I would suggest using a flashcard approach and understanding what these are and approaches. So what it is, who coined it, briefly how it works, and what are the approaches, and keep it simple that way. Motivational interviewing, again, as done by Rawlik and Miller. They can ask about they may ask you who Rawlik and Miller is. It's from positive psychology. It was an alternative to the traditional addiction treatments. So as far as this is, rather than using CBT, they use this. It's based on several constructs. A lot of it's really person-centered. They talk about self-efficacies, and then of course to build a collaborative relationship. So you can see a question, for example, say motivational interviewing, not a true or false, but all the following are aspects of motivational interviewing except, and they may say open-ended questions, reflections, summary, confrontations. Motivational interviewing is not a confrontational approach, so you know something's not right. And if they're asking about the question, the confrontational approach of motivational interviewing includes, they say there is no confrontation, that's CBT. So the idea here when you're studying this is that you need to make a card, or you use the CRC prep cards, which I would highly encourage you to get. They break this down pretty simple, and make sure you memorize what they are. And if you use them, you should know them. Multicultural counseling, this is a new one, okay? Multicultural counseling has been relatively new. I had to take a whole semester on this, which I actually think is really informative. It's hard, it's a hard class. If you've never taken a course in multicultural counseling, I would encourage you to do it. It's gonna really challenge your own biases that you have that you don't even realize, and open your eyes to a lot of things. I struggle with the class, many people struggle with it, but I appreciated it. With that, this is about being culturally competent. A lot of it is based off social justice, a lot of sociology involved. And of course, is looking at the equality or equity of an individual, so forth. So multicultural it has multiple frameworks to it, but basically, who is your target audience? Are the majority of your clients African-American, Native American, Asian American, so forth? You know, each culture has a different approach. Like, for example, there are some cultures where you can stare straight at each other in the eye and you know, you can talk face to face as normal, but in other cultures, when you stare somebody in the eye, that could be in its form of intimidation, and then they're gonna look at you. Some cultures may say, you know, they're not listening to what you're saying, they're trying to see if you have meaning behind what you're saying. You know, what is your real meaning behind it? And you gotta be able to step out your boundaries, because we help people with disabilities that come from all sorts of backgrounds. If they're in an Asian culture, they tend to be very quiet. They're all about the family. They're all about the structural support. What does the family want to do as a whole, not just the individual? So in this here, when you read this in the book, just make sure that if you're hearing something about a particular ethnicity or culture, they might be hinting about multicultural counseling. Okay. With attitudinal barriers, one's those agencies, knowledge and competency benefits, and of course, confidentiality. So those are the ethical obligations. What that means too is you can see a question that says, You know, the rehabilitation counselor is receiving a client who comes from Afghanistan. They're Middle Eastern and they follow the Islamic rule. This person's a female and she cannot talk to the client. She cannot talk to the counselor without her spouse being present or without her father being present. The best way to approach this would be X, Y, and Z. That's like, what would you do? Choose the best situation to that. You can see some, you might see something like that in the exam, but you need to know about multicultural counseling. And of course, counseling practice barriers to access, referral accessibility, and so forth. And if you can pop here in the chat, let me see this here. Ooh. As far as the interview for a vocational development specialist, if anybody wants to work up the side and help her, you're more than welcome to it. I do not have any questions for the actual interviews itself. I'm sorry. So good luck on your interview. I wish you luck. I'm sure there's someone in here that if they're willing to help you out, if you reach out to them, they can share some information with you. There's the other one too, the empowerment counseling approach. So this one's a relatively new one, but basically, you know, before, if you think about the historical aspect of it, we saw clients that they have a problem. Let's treat the problem. Let's not rehabilitate them to be empowered from fixing a problem to become better. Let's just put them on a medication and let them be on their way and say they did something. No, now we're about empowering, because again, ADA Act, the Rehabilitation Act of 1974, we're about empowering them, because we really don't want the clients to have to keep relying on us to help them solve the problems. We want them to be able to fulfill and fix their own problems. So that's why we give them tools, skills, and knowledge they need to be self-sufficient. And again, for rehabilitation counselors, we focus on what they can do and not what they can't do. With that too, again, the empowerment, I'm a big person about empowerment. So we look at a person's strength, we don't look at a person's disability. I'll give you a fun example here. If somebody's trying to apply for Social Security benefits, the Social Security wants to know what they can't do. And if it's significant to the point that they cannot work, then okay, they're disabled, they cannot work. But if they're going to VR services, we're not looking at what they can't do, we're looking to see what they are able to do. And we're trying to empower them to be like, okay, the Social Security says you cannot have it, but you have the disability, but you're still able to work, you still can do certain things, maybe just not the capacity that you want. So as that, you should know that. With that, there's also humanistic approaches. This talks about person-centered, existential, and Gestalt. These are classics therapy. So make sure you know what those are. Again, person-centered, think Carl Rogers. We're talking about the presently, how they see it. And that just helps them to facilitate growth and movement towards self-actualization rather than hindered by the sort of view of oneself. Basically, this is about improving a person's self-esteem. So I'm not going to go too much into it, because you as professional counselors probably have clients that have a lot of low self-esteem, especially if they've been sheltered. So if you're working on somebody's self-esteem to improve their self-image, saying, okay, granted, let's say for instance, they recently got an amputation and they think that they're deformed and they cannot have children, because there are some people who are discriminating against people who have an amputation. They go, well, they can have children, they can't have sex or anything. And that's not true, they can. You would probably want to use a person-centered approach with that person to help them build self-esteem, especially if they feel like they cannot be loved. With that though, of course, counselor has to be genuine, have an unconditional positive regard, and an accurate, empathetic, not sympathetic understanding. Who here wants to share the difference between empathy versus sympathy? And you feel free to get off the mic and share. What is the difference between empathy and sympathy?
Empathy, you're pretty much putting you're feeling your shoe, you're in their shoes with empathy. Sympathy, you're kind of feeling sorry for them.
I appreciate it. That makes sense. And thanks for sharing, John. Right, because they have enough people and people with disabilities have enough individuals in their lives pitting somebody. We pity the person when we see them panhandling in the street and we're driving past them. We don't want to give them anything because we think we're going to use it for something else. We pity the person that can't get the help that they need and says, oh, I feel sorry for you. Let me help you feel better. No, we don't want to do that as a counselor because then that makes them what? Makes that person feel even worse or makes them rely on us. But empathy, you understand what they're coming from, and then you help to make sure that they construct what they're doing to understand that they're being listened and heard, so like that you can give them the interventions. I don't know about your company, but my company stresses a lot of empathy because at the end of the day, especially in job development or in a workforce development center, it could be us coming in, it could be myself going into the door, being unemployed, trying to find work. So we have to be empathetic towards the individual, but we're not going to show much we're not going to be really sympathetic, you know, as far as pitying them. So make sure you understand the difference between the two, the definitions, because that could be acting in CRC. The other one, theory 2, is existential. So this is talking about facilitating meeting, freedom to choose, taking responsibility of choices, acknowledging limitations and barriers. So kind of, I want to say acceptance therapy, but sounds similar, but it helps increase awareness. This is putting the client, this is pretty much entering the client's worldview to understand their worldview, where they're coming from. So again, going back to those cultural barriers, me as a white Hispanic male would not know what it is to have to tell a child who's an African-American adolescent what they need to say or do if they get pulled over by the police. I would not know how that is. I wouldn't be able to say. I wouldn't know what that experience is like. I wouldn't know what it is for an Asian American to go into an all-white area and get told multiple various slurs. Even though it's multicultural, you want to understand where they're coming from. So an existential, though, is putting yourself to understand what they're coming from, so like that they help regain their whole life. You know, it's kind of like putting yourselves in your shoes and going forth. And I think existential. This also deals with death, isolation, and existence. I think this was also used for people who are also prisoners of war. So I might be back tracing my words here, but basically it's moving towards the actualization of what you can do, you know. Pretty much understanding what is your meaning of life and so forth. But even so, you want to put yourself in the shoes of the other person, understand. And it's using, again, acceptance, authenticity, and of course, being empathetic. So next one is Gestalt. Fits pearls. It means the whole meaning greater than all parts. Understanding the human as a product of interrelationship between thoughts, feelings, perceptions, and souls. Focuses on the here and now, not looking into the past, but incorporating the past into the present. When I think of this, sometimes I think of like mindfulness, which we have a mindfulness expert in the room, but she hasn't left yet. She left. Okay. But I'm thinking like mindfulness meditations and things like that for around here. But in the book, we're talking about individuals have the capacity to shape their reality and make their informed choices. Remember, if you're in a VRC role, rehabilitation role, at the end of the day, you can lead the horse to water, but you cannot force them to drink. So to the individual, whether or not they're gonna take the first sip or take the first steps. And that's part of Gestalt, is bringing them to make those decisions, have the choice whether they want to continue living that way or they don't. With that too, of course, it's getting understanding many aspects of the self, to increase awareness of their own person and who they are responsible for themselves. And again, it's thinking about at the moment, not what happened in the past and so forth. Some of this here, if you've heard of like empty chairs, that helps you with unfinished business. Those are some things working with people in the past to get a moment to there. Take care. With that, changing pronouns, sharing hunches, and I'm not too sure about this one with dream work. Okay, but I'm not the expert in Gestalt. But make sure you read what is Gestalt, who is it made by, and what is its specific techniques at minimum. CBT, there's all sorts of CBTs now, believe it or not. It's being applied to many, many things, but the three big ones is behavior therapy, the cognitive, and then REBT, rational emotive behavior therapy. With behavior therapy, again, that's talking about classical conditioning versus operant. You might see a question come up as far as Ivan Pavlov versus B.F. Skinner. So make sure you know the difference between them. With that, let me ask you, even with the slide here alone, what is the key difference between Ivan Pavlov's classical conditioning versus B.F. Skinner's operant conditioning? And I'm not going to ask you, John, I'm going to ask somebody else in the audience. This time, I'm going to pick on Brianna. Oh, I don't think Brianna's here. How
Sorry.
about?
That's okay. No, that's okay. I'm not too familiar with the Skinner. I'm not really that, I guess I really haven't really studied much on him, but the Pavlov, isn't that and correct me if I'm wrong, isn't that the one where it was the dogs with the saliva, right? With the dinner, right? Yeah. That like when they hear like the dinner bell, or when they hear the food, then like they react to it. But I'm not really sure what, to be honest with you, I'm not really familiar as much with Skinner as I am with Pavlov.
Okay, so and no, that's good that you shared that, so I can clarify a little bit into it. I have a background in the psychology, and they drill this into me hard, very deeply. The best way I learned about the difference between Pavlov and Skinner is when I think about Pavlov and we're talking about conditioning something or a stimulus, I think Ivan Pavlov, because a dog doesn't just do a thing by itself unless you train it to do it. If you train a dog to fear and attack something, that's what it's going to be trained to respond to. That's why dogs do so well as military working dogs, because they use a lot of the Ivan Pavlov's classical conditioning theories to condition a dog to respond to certain things, to find certain drugs, even to use as far as dealing with people who have health, like service dogs. You know, so if you have military working dogs, you have service dogs, because they respond to that. It's just adding the behavior that you want intended and making sure that the right stimuluses are connected to it. And then of course you can extinct it where it disappears and drops off for, but if it's an undesired. Skinner, when I think of Skinner, I think of a box, and I think of a Skinner box. And who here has not been to a casino floor and hit the slot machines? I'm sure at some point, most of us have been to a slot machine. When you put the coin in there and you're spinning the machine, and every now and then you're hitting a few bucks here and there, and see somebody next to you win the jackpot, you're getting like, I want to keep doing this, I want to keep doing this. And so you're reinforcing a certain behavior to elicit that response. So when somebody's talking about a reinforcement, that's talking about Skinner. And so when you're dealing with somebody, let's say, who has social skills issues and they're doing something that's not really socially acceptable, you want to use some sort of reinforcement to say, this is not a good thing to use this instead. You want to either replace it with something, or you want to disregard it and ignore it. And when they do the desired behavior, you want to praise that, like especially kids going to school. But like I mentioned, I think of a slot machine. I think of your cell phone when it randomly pings, you know, you want to keep looking at it constantly. It uses a similar theory. Even children that are laying down, you put those little chimes underneath them and bells and whistles. I think of it like a Skinner box too. It's basically reinforcing a certain behavior to elicit a certain outcome. So I hope that helps you now. Does that make sense for you now?
Yes, it does. Yes, thank you very much for clarifying. I like the examples, because then it helps me think, you know, of those examples when I see the names. So that's going to really help. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, I think when I saw some example, when I looked at some practice questions, example questions, they had some good examples of how these work, and they will give you a realistic situation. Like maybe as a school, they'll give you a setting as a school counselor in a series of exam, as a rehab counselor or job skills trainer, and let you know, like, is this form using a positive reinforcement or is this form using a negative reinforcement? So make sure you're reading the book, the difference between the two. Negative doesn't necessarily mean, or excuse me, punishment doesn't necessarily mean it's negative, because punishment can be positive or negative. But understanding at least how that works, and if you can make it practical into a situation, you should be able to at least understand the difference.
Okay.
So, brings me back to my undergraduate years in psychology. Okay, and I hope that clears up our eyes for everybody else too. Now, CBT, the biggest famous one, Aaron and Judith Beck. It's basically teaching about clients how they think so they can correct any faulty reasoning. So if something doesn't if the ends doesn't justify the means or the thoughts doesn't make sense, challenge it. If somebody has an irrational thought thinking, okay, the world think that my mom hates me because I don't go to work, or it's something very irrational like I think that everybody's really out to, or let's make it simple. I had a bad day at work because I didn't do X, Y, and Z. You know, no, maybe it wasn't really necessarily a bad day at work. Maybe it's just because you and the whole team had a whole bunch of other stuff put on you and you couldn't get to that client. So you use CBT, you identify the disordered thoughts, see how those negative thoughts are, like why are you telling yourself, what's the reason behind the thoughts, identify those things, look at different thinking patterns, and hypothesize whether or not those thoughts are true. Like for example, I'm gonna let's throw some humility here. When I came back from the war in Afghanistan, if I saw somebody that looked anything like an Afghan here in the United States, I immediately thought they were a terrorist. But because I was conditioned in war, and a lot of people in war look and dress like that, it took me a while to process those theories. Say, not everybody that from Afghanistan is a terrorist. You know, CBT helps identify those things. With that being mentioned too, the most recent one is the REBT. So now you're just taking it a step further for CBT, where instead of you just understanding and identifying those this sort of thinking, let's replace it with something that makes more sense. So instead of me thinking, oh, the guy in the part of my going back military, oh, the guy in the burqa and everything, or the woman in the burqa and stuff has a bomb underneath her. It's no, the people over there in Afghanistan or underneath extreme views at that location were in burqas. They were conditioned there. The ones here in the United States are U.S. citizens, and they're just following their culture. You know, but that took something to replace the negative views and learn about the culture to understand it, why they do that, and say, okay, it's not a black and white thing. It's actually something else, and it's just my thinking. You know, and with that too, there's a good slide on here which really helps you how to break it down. So if you don't know how to use REBT, use this slide. It's going to help you, and definitely use it. You also use it in dialectical behavior therapy. A DBT is similar, but it's still behavior therapy. We're good. We're almost there. We're almost there. Like I said, this is the big part. Okay. Next one is trait factor approach. This is talking about traits. So who here has ever used, or excuse me, has anybody ever used any sort of thing like the ONET ability profiler, Strong's interest inventories, or MMPI? And how do those things work?
I kind of briefly went through ONET online, and it gives you you can do your interests, do assessments, look at different aspects of employment. It's been a minute, but I do ONET online is one of the main ones that is often used. I know that.
Yeah, ONET ability profile, it's free. Who here ever heard themselves saying, oh, I'm a ENFJ? The personality on a job description. Those are what we call trait factors. Thank you, John. You're right. And so what that's talking about is the idea that your personality is going to determine what you want to do, your outlook in life, who you are, and what careers are going to be best for you. And rehabilitation counseling is extremely important. Because if somebody is an INJF, well, do you want to put them in an EFNP job? Which I would encourage you, if you don't know what those are, look those up. Because you could see something like that. There is a thing for it. But basically, it's the individuals understanding why they want to get into what they want to do, what are the skills behind it, what are their interests and attitudes and or abilities, okay? Also, that we'll talk about this later, but there's a thing called the Minnesota Theory of Work Adjustment. And just to kind of put into simple, basically, employers want employees, employees want the job from the employers, and if they both match, they're a good fit for each other. That's the easiest way to put it. But basically, if a person's personality, interests, and abilities are matched with the right employer looking for those personalities, skills, and abilities, they might have a good relationship. That's the easiest way to put it. But look that up, look up Minnesota Theory of Work Adjustment. I think there's a slides further down that talk about that. If not, I have a video. It's actually pretty cool, but we'll discuss more about that later. Psychodynamic theories. This one is Sigmund Freud. Just remember, anything psychodynamic, Sigmund Freud. They talk about ego psychologies, object relations therapy, and individual psychology. I would encourage you, please read them. Go back to school, learn a little bit, talk about those different stages, because there are some aspects in our therapy. If we're looking at ego, say somebody maybe a little narcissistic or a little bit, just might benefit from using something like this. Don't quote me, I'm not the expert on that, but there's different ways to identify it. Going back to Freud, they talk about id, ego, superego. Please study this. Please learn about it. This is how therapy began. And who here knows when psychoanalytic theory came out? This time, I'm going to pick on you, Cassidy Lewis. Cassidy, are you here with me? She's like, I
am, but I'm going to be honest, it has been some time, some numbers and dates are coming up, but I can't recall. I don't want to get it wrong.
That's fine. That's fine. And the reason why I'm challenging you to think about that is because I want you to remember the stuff, if you were here last session, about the different laws that came in, because around those laws that came in, also at the same time around some of these theories came out or were around coming out. Back in the 40s and 50s, psychodynamic theory was the biggest form of therapy that most people were getting. So let me give you a quick Google search. Thank you, Google. So when did psychoanalytic, and I don't know how to spell. 1890. So prior to doing CBT, prior to doing all that, everything was psychoanalytic theory. And it was very popular in Europe and in the United States. So even though it's in the 1890s, it came out pretty late, but it was used very popular here within the United States too, especially the late 50s and 60s. They're using a lot of it. So a lot of your older counselors, I'm talking about the real old ones, maybe your professors, are really good into this. So, but just keep in mind when you timeline this, also timeline where you're going for it. And thank you, Cassidy, for allowing me to pick on you for that. So, but it wasn't in the 1890s, it was way back. But the key thing here is it was done by Sigmund Freud, and in the 50s it became popular. There's also the ego psychology, which it focuses on strengthening the ego. With that too, remember certain people like Alfred Adler, there's a few other ones that still use similar stuff, similar branches, but they switched from psychoanalytic to something else. This is focusing the ego for facilitate reality testing, impulse control, and judgment. Hartman, talking about healthy ego, that's restraining yourself from doing impulsive behaviors. Object relations theories was part of that. How yourself, is it? Yes. Object relations theories, where are you? talking about, you know, are you worthy of love? Are you not worthy of love? These are internalized things. And so these are basically anything that's talking about internally about yourself, a lot of times is usually going to be a psychoanalytic theory approach that you're taking. This was the opposite. I think it was this one. It was founded by Alfred Adler. Humans are motivated not just internally, but by socialization. So social cognitive theory, social behavior theory, if I'm not mistaken, human growth and development. They could ask you, CRC questions could ask you about Erickson's A stage and ask you about one of these. So make sure you at least know what the stages are, at least know what they are, who coined it. Are they talking about 4 stages of the human growth and development? That's not Erik Erikson, that's Piaget. Just make sure you remember that. And let me ask you all. Actually, I'm going to go ahead and ask Mrs. Sunny Martin. Why was it important for a rehabilitation counselor to understand the human growth and development counseling?
Why is it important?
Right.
Well, to know what stage I would say our clients are in, and maybe what stage our clients are in.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. Right. So, you know, in addition to that, think of it this way. If a child's born with a chronic illness, and some of the theories, especially like Erickson's A stage developmental stages, they might not quite achieve certain goals compared to other healthy or normal children going through the stages in school. Somebody with autism may have the mentality of, and I'm just picking out a disability, may have a mentality of an elementary school age child, or somebody who has a they call it neurodiverse, may have a stage 3 type behavior level versus somebody who's very high functioning, maybe in early middle adulthood. Because when it comes to deal with like chronic disabilities or inherited, they might end up losing stages in life. That also includes people who may have dealt with sexual trauma, adolescents. They may have lost certain parts of their lives in stages. So as a rehabilitation counselor, when we're doing our assessment, understanding it, at least having a factor as far as like, okay, a school counselor specifically, let's go school counseling. When you're doing an early identification of a suspected child with a certain disability, especially with a cognitive issue, and they're acting differently, you may be using an assessment that's looking at where the person, like an intelligence test, looking at where they might be in their stage of life, potentially. So even as I said, we talk about, oh, when we think you're in this stage or that stage, it helps us to assess where the client may be in their life stage. You know, I'll give you the fun one, soldiers. Soldiers got 18 and 19 years old are going to war. They're growing up super quick. They lost out on some of the early adulthoods because they're going to war, you know? And so when they come back, they try to be young again sometimes. But just kind of put that out. Just appreciate you, Sonny. Thank you for chiming in. So with that too, other important topics. Okay, this is about termination. So I'm not going to go too much into this here. This is really talking about group counseling, so I'm not going to go into all that here, but that pretty much covers our counseling theories and the evidence-based practices. So if some of these sound new to you or you're kind of refreshing and getting the familiarity, I would encourage you, definitely get the Red Book, because they break it down into a lot more bits and pieces. It's very heavy. You will see questions in the CRC exam for them. So make sure you at least understand the difference between the trait factor, the CBT, the psychoanalytic, Sigmund Freud, Erik Erikson. Make sure you take some extra time to study in this, because they will ask those questions. You will see them, regardless if it's heavy or if it's literally, you're going to have questions that come up from them. Not only that, they may use these theories and make it applicable to things like the case management, the chronic illness with disabilities, and so forth, and use and talk about these theories in a treatment process. So whew, that went really good. Anybody have any questions, concerns, thoughts, or comments about some of the things we discussed today? No. Well, I will tell you this much, thank you for surviving. When we did this last year, this took a long time to go through, but I'm glad we got this done pretty quickly. Like I said, most of the stuff in here, I try to make it as simple as possible on the slides. So like that you have it to make it easy to digest. But I would encourage you, when you're studying this here, flashcards as well is gonna be the best. And using the, if you have the CRC prep cards, or if you're using Quizlet, that's gonna really help you to understand that. And don't overthink it, just keep it simple. Theory, who it is, what does it do? And then you'll apply it into the thing. So with that,